Like all Romance languages, Asturian evolved out of Common Romance or Vulgar Latin, regional dialects of Latin spoken around the Roman Empire. Eventually, Common Romance evolved into many Romance languages, one of these being Astur-Leonese, which gave birth to Mirandese, Leonese, and today's subject, Asturian. As of 2017, there are 641,502 speakers of Asturian. It's only recognized as a minority language in Spain, but is also a protected language under the Statute of Autonomy in Asturias, and is also an elective in school. Around 1065, present-day Spain was comprised of a set of multiple kingdoms, including the Kingdom of Leon. From the 12th to 14th centuries, Astur-Leonese was used in official documents and such. During the time of the Reconquista and the reign of Spain's kingdoms, Latin and Asturian had a diglossic situation, meaning both were used together in certain contexts, Latin being the religious and more formal language, and Asturian being the language of the common people. Many examples of agreements, donations, and wills, as well as other commercial contracts from this time show how Asturian and their other dialects were replacing Latin. But as the Spanish language came to the region, Castilian began to replace Asturian as a native language with each generation. While Asturian media was still alive, Castilian culture began to replace Asturian culture throughout Asturias and surrounding areas. In 1974, Asturias began a movement for acceptance and use of the Asturian language again. The basics of the plan were to develop and modernize the language. This led to the creation of the Academy of the Asturian Language in 1980, with the approval of the Asturias Regional Council. One important feature of Astur-Leonese, though, is its dialect continuum. Some of these dialects are often counted as separate sister languages of Asturian, like Mirandese, spoken in Portugal. However, what can be considered a variety of a language versus a sister language is a hard debate or a continuum where many blend together. Let's look at some of the features of Asturian. We'll compare them to the Spanish equivalents. In Spanish,
Voy a la escuela 5 días de la semana.
and in Asturian.
Voy a la escuela 5 días de la semana.
These sentences mean I go to school 5 days of the week. We can see that both sentences are similar, but not the same. First, the verb to go are different.
Ir.
Dir.
Both here are the first person singular. Next, this phrase.
A la escuela.
A la escuela.
Both are translated as to the school, not just to school. Next, the word for days.
Días.
Dies.
In both languages, there are many endings to show grammatical gender. In Spanish, there's o and os for the masculine, and a and as for the feminine. But in Asturian, it's u and os for masculine, a and s for feminine, and o is the neuter form. Asturian is one of the few Romance languages that retain Latin's neuter gender. Note that neuter nouns can take either masculine or feminine endings if used metaphorically. In the case of Spanish and Asturian, the word for day is actually a masculine word, despite with the feminine ending as and es respectively. Then the say of the week are almost the same. You could also say per semana. Next.
Las madres se unen para comer y hablar.
Les madres xúnense para comer y a falar.
These sentences mean the mothers get together to eat and talk. First we see the phrase for the mothers.
Las madres.
Les madres.
Both are the feminine plural definite articles, and you can see that the other articles are similar. Also related to that, the indefinite articles are almost the same as well. Next, the verb for get together.
Se unen.
Xúnense.
The verb in Spanish is,
Unirse.
and in Asturian it's.
Xunirse.
However, you could also say,
A unirse.
and the sentence above can also be.
Les madres aúnense para comer y a falar.
Both verbs have the particle se, which is a reflexive pronoun, meaning this done to oneself, or in this case, themselves, and are placed differently in both languages. In Spanish, it's a separate word before the verb, while in Asturian, it's a clitic that attaches to the end of the verb. Next, the verb for to is different. Both words here are actually the verb for, often used before a verb, in this case, comer, which is the same as both languages, meaning to eat. The word for and is different as well, not to be confused with ya, meaning already in both languages. And the word for talk.
Hablar.
Falar.
A lot of Western Romance languages, including Asturian, often have an F, where it's a silent H in Spanish.
Mi novia no quiere gatas.
La mio moza nun quiere gates.
These sentences mean, my girlfriend doesn't want cats. The possessive here is formed differently.
Mi novia.
La mio moza.
In Asturian, there are two types of possessives. stressed and unstressed. La mio here is the unstressed form. In the unstressed forms, they're preceded by a definite article which agrees with the noun. In the first, second, and third singular, the endings are only o. In the stressed forms, however, they have gender distinctions, but they're only used as pronouns. So if you want to say the flower is mine in Spanish
La flor es mía.
and in Asturian,
La flor ye mía.
or
La flor ye de mío.
the negation word for not is similar. Next, the verb for want. It's the third person singular of querer, but also means love in Spanish. And the endings for the word for cats are different.
El profesor no había venido hoy.
El profesor nun viniera, güey.
These sentences mean the teacher hadn't arrived today. The main verbs in this sentence are the verb venir, meaning to come. This sentence contains the past perfect, but both languages built the tense differently. In Spanish, it's constructed with the verb haber, which is the auxiliary verb for have, plus the past participle of the main verb, while in Asturian, it's a simple tense with no auxiliary verb. And the words for today are different.
Hoy.
Güey.
Sometimes you'll see that words with o in Spanish become gue in Asturian. Another example is the word for eye in Spanish
Ojo.
and in Asturian.
Güeyu.
Necesito alimentar el perro de mi amiga.
Necesito alimentar el perro de mi amiga.
These sentences mean I need to feed my friend's dog. The verb to need is conjugated for the first person singular in both sentences. The word for dog is similar. Remember that o in the masculine singular becomes u.
El perro.
El perro.
There is an alternative word that can be used in both languages, gan, and this phrase can be translated as of my friend. Let's look at one last sentence.
¿Por qué mi esposa no me ama?
¿Por qué la mio mujer no me ama?
These two questions mean, why doesn't my wife love me? The word for why is similar.
¿Por qué?
¿Por qué?
Note that in Asturian, it doesn't use the upside down question mark and upside down exclamation point like Spanish does. So if you want to say love me in the imperative, you say
Ámame.
in Spanish and
Ámame.
in Asturian. The word for my wife is different. You could also say
Mujer.
which means woman in Spanish, and in Asturian
Esposa.
can be used. Again, we see the negation word for not is different than the word for love me.
Me ama.
Me ama.
When the verb is not in the imperative, used for commands or instructions, the pronoun is placed before the verb in both cases. Also, a note on the pronouns for a second. Subject pronouns in Asturian are mainly dropped because the verb conjugates to agree with the subject. These pronouns are only used for emphasis, and you can see how similar they are to other Romance languages, mainly Spanish. As you see by now, Asturian is not just simply a dialect of Spanish, it's a sister dialect of Spanish, or sister language in this case. With the vast array of Astur-Leonese dialects, it may be hard to assume that mainly one version of the language exists, or maybe one dialect is superior to the other. If you want to learn Asturian, check out the Astur-Leonese League on Discord. Anyways, thank you all for watching. My name is Shade, and I'll see you all next time.